All right, welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive with us?
Definitely. Always ready to dive in.
Today, we're going to be tackling a topic that might seem a little, uh, well, dry at first glance.
That's often how it is with the best topics. Appearances can be deceiving.
So true. And trust me, the sources you guys sent in for this one, really fascinating stuff. We're going deep into the world of pharmaceutical manufacturing.
Specifically, we'll be focusing on a section of the FDA regulations Subpart E of 21 CFR Part 211.
Okay, gotta admit, even I'm feeling a little lost already. Subpart E CFR. What are we even talking about here?
Don't worry, we'll break it down. Basically, it all boils down to control. Control of components and drug product containers, to be exact.
Components. So we're talking about like the ingredients that go into making medicine and the containers. I guess that's pretty self-explanatory, right?
Exactly. It's not just about the active ingredient, it's every single thing that goes into that final product you see on the shelf.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. But why so much emphasis on control? I mean, isn't it just a matter of mixing the right stuff together?
If only it were that simple. In the pharmaceutical world, the stakes are incredibly high. We're talking about people's health, their well-being. You can't just throw things together and hope for the best.
Right, of course.
Meh.
Makes sense. So Subpart E is kind of like the rule book for making sure every single ingredient, every container, meets some super strict quality standards.
That's a great way to put it. It's all about ensuring that every component is exactly what it's supposed to be and that it stays that way throughout the whole process. From the moment it arrives at the facility to the moment it ends up in the hands of a patient.
You know, I'm getting a feeling this involves a lot of paperwork, maybe even like a giant mountain of paperwork.
You're not wrong. Documentation is a huge part of Subpart E, and for good reason. It's all about traceability and accountability.
Traceability. So if something goes wrong, you can track it back to the exact source.
Exactly. It's about creating a complete history for every single component, every step of the way. No guesswork, no cutting corners.
Okay, I can definitely see why that's important, especially when we're talking about medications. But let's get back to that journey you mentioned. Walk us through what actually happens to a component, let's say a raw material, as it makes its way through this whole process.
All right, picture this. A truck pulls up to the loading dock, delivering a shipment of, let's say, a crucial raw material for your medication. That's where our story begins.
And that's where that mountain of paperwork starts to grow, right?
You bet. As soon as that shipment arrives, the documentation process kicks into high gear. Certificates of analysis from the supplier, invoices, arrival dates, even temperature logs during shipping. Every detail is recorded.
Wow, that's impressive. So they're really keeping tabs on everything, huh?
Absolutely. Nothing is left to chance. Now, once our raw material is off the truck and all that initial paperwork is in order, it needs to be properly identified.
Okay, so like they slap a label on it and call it a day.
Nope. It's a bit more sophisticated than that. We're talking specific identification codes, sometimes even passwords, all designed to prevent mix-ups. Remember, even a seemingly small error could have huge consequences in pharmaceutical manufacturing.
So it's not just about organization, it's about security too.
Precisely. And those codes and passwords are also about data integrity. Everything is tracked electronically, ensuring that the information is accurate and secure.
Makes sense. So our raw material is properly identified, it's logged in the system. What's next? Where does it go from there?
Next up, storage. Now, you might think storage is just about keeping things organized and out of the way, but it's actually a lot more involved than that.
Okay, I'm sensing there's more to this than meets the eye. What else is involved in storage?
Remember those GMP principles we mentioned earlier, good manufacturing practices? It's all about control. And in this case, we're talking about controlling the environment where components are stored to prevent contamination.
Contamination, like dust and dirt.
That, and so much more. We're talking about controlling temperature and humidity, protecting against pests, even seemingly minor things can affect the quality of a component. Remember, consistency is key.
So it's not just a warehouse, it's like a high-security vault for pharmaceutical ingredients.
Exactly. And while we're on the topic of storage, we can't forget about expiration dates. Especially for chemicals, using expired materials could be incredibly dangerous.
Yikes, good point. So once a component has been received, identified, stored, and of course generated mountains of paperwork, what happens next in this epic journey?
Next comes the really exciting part, testing. Every single batch of components undergoes a battery of tests to ensure it meets the required standards.
Ah, so this is where the science really kicks in.
You got it. And we're not talking about just one or two simple tests. We're talking about a whole range of analyses to ensure the identity, strength, quality, and purity of every single component.
Sounds pretty thorough. What kind of tests are we talking about here?
Well, for starters, there's identity testing to confirm that the component is actually what it claims to be. Then you've got tests for strength and purity, making sure the component meets the required specifications. And of course, there are tests to check for things like microbiological contamination.
Microbiological contaminations. We're talking about like bacteria and
Well,
stuff.
exactly. It's all about ensuring that the components are free from any harmful contaminants that could compromise the safety and effectiveness of the final product.
So it's like a pharmaceutical CSI episode. Every component is a suspect, and the lab is the scene of the crime.
I love that analogy. And speaking of labs, one of your sources mentioned something called system suitability testing. It caught my eye too.
Yeah, that one sounded pretty technical. What exactly is system suitability testing?
It's actually not as complicated as it sounds. Think of it like calibrating your instruments before you bake a cake. You need to make sure your oven is at the right temperature, your measuring cups are accurate. Everything needs to be working perfectly before you start.
So it's like a pre-test for the testing equipment to make sure everything is accurate.
Precisely. And that attention to detail is crucial for every single test. Remember, we're talking about medications that people rely on. There's no room for error.
It's really amazing how much science goes into just making sure the components are up to par. And I'm guessing all of this testing generates even more paperwork, right?
You bet. Every step of the way, from sample preparation to data analysis, is meticulously documented and controlled. And it doesn't stop there. We haven't even talked about things like in-process testing, where quality is monitored throughout the entire production process, not just at the beginning.
In-process testing, that sounds like a whole other layer of complexity.
It is. But that, my friend, is a story for part 2 of our deep dive. You're right, in-process testing, it adds a whole other dimension to this whole quality control thing.
So where does it fit into the timeline? We left off with our raw material, passing all those initial tests. What happens next?
Well, even though a component has passed all those tests, it doesn't get a free pass, so to speak. Remember, GMP good manufacturing practices, it's all about control throughout the entire process.
Right, so they don't just assume everything's fine and dandy just because the initial test came back okay.
Exactly. In-process testing means samples are taken and analyzed at various stages of production. Think of it like checkpoints along the way.
Okay, so they're constantly checking to make sure things are on track. But wouldn't that slow things down quite a bit?
It might seem that way, but in reality, in-process testing helps prevent costly mistakes and delays later on. Think about it, if a problem with a component isn't caught until the very end, you might have to scrap a whole batch of product.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that would be a disaster. Not to mention, potentially dangerous if a faulty batch actually made it out into the world.
Exactly. So those in-process checks, they're like an early warning system, catching problems before they snowball into something bigger.
Makes sense. So we've got our components going through all these tests, but what about the companies that supply these materials in the first place? Are they just ordering from any random supplier?
Great question. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of Subpart E, supplier qualification.
Supplier qualification.
Yeah.
Sounds intense.
It is. Remember how we talked about traceability being so important? Well, that traceability extends all the way back to the source.
So you don't just pick up the phone and order a ton of raw material from, like, some random company on the internet.
Nope, definitely not. Pharmaceutical companies have extremely strict requirements for their suppliers. Before a supplier can even be considered, they go through a thorough vetting process.
So it's like a background check, but for companies.
Pretty much. They'll audit the supplier's facilities, review their manufacturing practices, and even test their materials to make sure they're up to snuff.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. So it's like a chain of trust. Everyone's got to be on the same page when it comes to quality.
Exactly. And that chain of trust, it's reinforced through ongoing monitoring. It's not a one-and-done kind of deal.
Right. Things can change. Companies can slip up. You can't just assume everything's fine forever.
Exactly. So let's imagine our component, it's sailed through all the tests, made it past the supplier scrutiny, and it's finally ready to be used in production. Now, we've talked about all the documentation required under Subpart E, all those written procedures. Well, those procedures are really important when it comes to the actual handling and using of these components.
Okay, so we're moving from the lab to the factory floor now.
Exactly. And on that factory floor, every single step is governed by those detailed instructions. How materials are weighed and measured, how equipment is operated, even how things are transferred from one container to another, it's all meticulously documented and controlled.
Wow, it sounds almost choreographed, like a perfectly synchronized dance of ingredients and equipment.
Yeah. I like that. And that choreography, it's essential for maintaining consistency and preventing errors. Even a small deviation from those established procedures could compromise the final product.
Speaking of deviations, one of the sources you sent in actually mentioned that deviations are like an expected part of the process.
That's right. In any manufacturing process, no matter how well controlled it is, deviations are bound to happen. But it's how those deviations are handled that makes a big
So
difference.
it's not about pretending they never happen. It's about having a plan to deal with them effectively.
Exactly. Subpart D, it's very specific about how deviations need to be documented and investigated. You need to figure out what caused the deviation, take steps to correct it so it doesn't happen again, and of course, document the whole thing.
So those deviations, they're actually an opportunity to learn and improve the process.
You got it. A chance to identify weak spots and make the system even stronger.
And I'm guessing all this documentation, test results, supplier info, those deviation reports, it all comes together in one super important document, right? The batch record.
The batch record, it's like the holy grail of pharmaceutical manufacturing. That one document tells the complete story of each batch of medication from start to finish.
So like a birth certificate, a history book, and a quality control checklist all in one.
Perfect analogy. And that batch record, it's scrutinized very, very carefully before a batch of medication can be released. Experts pore over every detail, looking for any inconsistencies or red flags that might indicate a problem.
Wow, they really don't miss a thing.
They can't afford to. Remember, we're talking about medications people are going to be taking. The stakes are incredibly high.
This whole deep dive, it's really given me a newfound appreciation for the complexity of pharmaceutical manufacturing. It's not just popping a pill, it's this whole intricate process behind it.
And we're not even done yet. There's another super important element we need to talk about, the people involved. We've touched on hygiene, but it goes way beyond that.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's so important about the human element in all this?
Well, think about all these complex procedures, the testing, the mountains of paperwork. Who's responsible for making sure all this happens correctly?
Robots.
Supercomputers.
Tempting, but no. It all comes down to people. Highly trained, dedicated people who really get the importance of their role in ensuring the quality and safety of those medications.
So training, that's a big deal in this industry.
Absolutely. Subpart E, it doesn't just dictate what needs to be done, it also outlines requirements for training those personnel. And it's not just a one-time thing either. Training's got to be ongoing, making sure everyone's up to date on procedures, new regulations, all that.
Makes sense. Got to keep those skills sharp. Plus, I imagine it's easy to get, complacent when you're doing the same thing day in and day out.
Exactly, and that's why those training programs, they often include things like simulations, real-world scenarios to keep people engaged and thinking critically.
So it's not just about memorizing rules, it's about understanding why those rules exist in the first place.
Right, and that's where this whole idea of a quality culture comes in. Quality culture. I've heard that phrase thrown around, but I gotta admit, I'm not sure I really understand what it means.
It's about going beyond just checking boxes and following the rules blindly. It's about creating an environment where quality is everyone's responsibility.
So it's not just about, top-down enforcement. It's about everyone being invested in making sure things are done right.
Exactly. It takes leadership commitment, open communication, and a shared understanding that patient safety, that's the ultimate goal.
Wow, so we're really going beyond just the technical stuff here. We're talking about, organizational philosophy now.
That's what makes this whole topic so interesting. It's not just about rules and regulations. It's about people, processes, a commitment to quality that touches every aspect of pharmaceutical manufacturing.
It really is. This whole deep dive, it's definitely changed the way I think about those little pills in my medicine cabinet. It's not just a pill. It's like the end result of this whole huge, complex, meticulously controlled process.
That's a great takeaway. And guess what? We're not even done yet. We still need to talk about the real-world impact of all this and maybe some surprising connections to other industries. But I think that's a story for part 3 of our deep dive.
All right, so we're back, ready to wrap things up. Our deep dive into the world of pharmaceutical manufacturing and this whole Subpart E thing. It's been, a lot to take in.
It really has. We've covered so much ground, from that one component's journey to supplier qualification, in-process testing, how to handle deviations, even this whole idea of quality culture. Whew.
I'll admit I'm looking at my medicine cabinet a little differently now.
I bet. You realize there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than we usually think about.
A lot more. And it all comes back to making sure those medications are safe and effective. But you were saying there's like another angle to this whole thing, something we haven't touched on yet.
Yeah, there is. And it might surprise you. It's how this Subpart E stuff, those principles, they're actually relevant to other industries too.
Really other industries? Like what?
Well, think about it. Any industry where even a tiny defect, a little impurity, could have like disastrous consequences.
Okay, I'm thinking, give me an example.
Aerospace. Imagine a faulty part in an airplane engine. Not good.
Yeah, no, not good at all.
Or the food industry. Contamination there could make a lot of people sick.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. So you're saying the same attention to detail, all that testing, documentation, that quality culture thing could be useful in those fields too.
Absolutely. And in many cases, they've already adopted similar principles. Like the food industry, they use the system called HACCP. It's all about identifying and controlling hazards in the food production process.
Pretty similar, right?
So like a food safety version of Subpart E?
You could say that. It shows that these principles, quality management, minimizing risks, they're not just for pharmaceuticals.
It makes you wonder why more industries don't do this. Safer products, less risk. Who wouldn't want that?
Well, there are challenges, of course. It takes time, resources, and, everyone has to be on board with that whole continuous improvement mindset. But in the long run, those investments, wouldn't they pay off? I mean, we talk about how preventing mistakes, avoiding recalls, that saves money too, right?
Definitely. Plus, think about the company's reputation, building trust with customers, even attracting good employees. It all ties in.
So it's not just about avoiding the bad stuff. It's about creating a positive cycle of quality.
Exactly. And I think that's why we see more and more industries moving in this direction. It's not just about checking boxes. It's about doing things better, safer, more reliably for everyone.
It's pretty amazing. When you think about it, we started with this very specific set of rules for pharmaceuticals. And we've ended up talking about the bigger picture of quality and how it impacts so many aspects of our lives.
It's been quite a journey. Shows how even something that seems really technical, like Subpart E, can lead to some interesting conversations, right?
Totally. I know I've learned a lot. This whole deep dive has given me a whole new perspective.
Me too.
So, to everyone listening out there, if you're in a field where even the tiniest thing matters, think aerospace, food, anything like that, remember what we talked about today. That attention to detail, that commitment to quality, it really can make all the difference.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and stay curious.